So I'm just out of here for a hike, and just wanted to do a quick video, sort of vlog style, just rambling about the concept of ownership and property, because I think that this topic is pretty important in terms of how the human species can relate to the world. Obviously, in modern times, there is a lot of issue with the habitat and lifestyle that humans are imposing onto the world, if you could even really call it habitat. I guess it sort of depends how you're defining habitat. But anyway, there are quite a few issues with the types of environments and lifestyles that humans live in as a result of their environments, primarily because a lot of people, probably more than half of the population, probably quite a bit more than half of the population, live in environments that do not provide what they need locally, and then keep them dependent on trade and import, which necessarily, if you're getting stuff from somewhere else, you're going to be dependent on an indirect relationship with another place, and that kind of indirect relationship opens up space for a lot of corruption in terms of how the other environment that is being depended on or exported from is treated and related to. So anyway, in that vein of thought, it's pretty important for people to be able to develop locally productive environments for themselves, which are not only direct relationships with the place they live, but also in partnership with the processes of ecological succession and the water cycle, as those are the basis of life on Earth, which of course includes humans. The human species is an emergent property of high-level ecological succession. We come from at least a savanna type system, if not a jungle or forest type system. So trying to base our entire global culture on low diversity fields of annual plants is pretty impractical, since that's a very infant level of ecological succession. That's the kind of system that would establish itself temporarily in the wake of a natural disaster. So yeah, I think that that sort of dependence on agriculture, which here I'm talking about a pretty literal etymological definition of agriculture, as in a reference to the Latin terms of agricultura, which refer to field cultivation, and in particular stems from the history of a Roman law, a Roman agrarian law, regarding the management of conquered lands and how they can be used to produce rations for soldiers, basically. So obviously in that context, it would make sense to produce rations for soldiers through grains, because they can be produced fairly quickly in one season and they store pretty well for traveling. Anyway, I think that that use of field cultivation, and particularly low diversity fields of annual plants, likely stems from a much older event or relationship than Roman law even. I would actually hypothesize that it's related to the end of the last ice age, during the bolling allerod and the younger dryas period, when there were at least a few thousand years of pretty catastrophic climate change, which almost certainly, and as evidenced by geological history, removed a lot of habitat that was previously there, or changed it fundamentally in a way that it would no longer be recognizable as the world that was previously known. I think that the trauma from that amount of loss for quite a while, which of course the human species lived through, that was only about 12,000 years ago, so it's relatively recent in terms of, geological history, and also in terms of human existence, since humans like our particular species has been around for about 300,000 years at least, and the Homo genus, which is fairly anatomically similar to us, has been around for about 3 million years at least. So yeah, 12,000 years is fairly recent in that context. So anyways, I think that the trauma from all that loss at the beginning of the Holocene epoch could very realistically have contributed to a sort of trauma bonding to a way of life, almost. I think that agriculture, as in the cultivation of low diversity fields of annual plants, could have been originally a coping strategy to get through the times just following the natural disasters of the transition into the Holocene. And of course, if it had been used temporarily, it could have actually been a pretty reasonable transition to re-establish the beginnings of ecological succession through intentional planting of annual plants to begin cycling the biomass again and accumulating biomass, and to begin rebuilding soil. But for whatever reason, probably some group of people, and not everyone, got stuck in this way of living and just continued to practice that indefinitely, or at least tried to, which of course resulted in desertification of some previously fertile environments, such as the Fertile Crescent. And I would actually guess that it probably had something to do with the desertification of the Sahara, and even maybe the creation of the Taklamakan Desert, and likely was related to the development of that entire scar of brown land which stretches from the Middle East across Africa and Eurasia. You can see that pretty clearly if you look at satellite images of the Earth. So back to the concept of ownership. Right now, I think for a lot of people, it would be difficult to even conceptualize how they could begin to create a locally productive environment for themselves, because we are so codependent in this economic system. People don't really have a whole lot of opportunity to decide what type of environment they're going to be in, often because of economic restrictions, poverty, and just the fact that so many urban environments are already built and paved over pretty much entirely. There's not a whole lot of space for ecosystems, like fully developed ecosystems, multi-layered, high diversity systems, to become established without first removing pretty much all of the infrastructure that people have come to depend on. Restrictions of the concept of ownership, particularly as it relates to absentee land ownership, the idea that land can be possessed even if no one is there. I think that this is basically just extortion. It's not really, doesn't really have any other practical use. It is primarily just financial extortion, using the land and using dishonesty in order to extract financial profit from restriction through violence. So obviously there is a very real thing, which is privacy, that is quite a bit different from ownership. Ownership as the legal concept refers to possession primarily, and the concept of belonging, which is a lot more complicated. So the concept of belonging is expressed in multiple different avenues across human thought and social interaction. In the context of ownership and property, it seems pretty much related to an idea of what is right, as in something that should be, which also ties into the concept of legal rights, with the concept of legal rights basically just being a reflection of laws, and that they are both basically just the description of boundaries which are to be enforced by violence, if they can't be enforced any other way. Although really, if it's not through violence, it's not really enforcement. I mean, I guess you could say that they can be enforced through coercion, but primarily people either go along with them voluntarily or they go along with them because of the threat of violence or the potential for violence, or they go along with them involuntarily because of the application of violence, which is of course monopolized today by governments pretty much everywhere around the world. So you can begin to see where the problem comes into play with ownership when people are stuck in an arbitrary restriction based on economic extortion of land, where the land, which is a living thing in itself, it is undeniably a living thing, it changes and grows over time, and has relationships with other organisms. The land, which is a living thing, is claimed as a possession of people, and often is claimed as a possession even when there is no actual presence on the land at all. That restriction for economic purposes really limits the ability for many people in modern times to go forward with the creation of locally productive habitat, even if they wanted to. There is obviously the entire topic of education, which I will address in another video, I'm sure, because that's arguably an even more important topic, but that's also a lot more complicated, and I don't really have time to get into it right now. Speaking of which, I probably should get going, but yeah, I think that this is a pretty important topic that people need to think about. I hope that this video could get people to consider some things about ownership and land use and human relationships with the world that they may not have otherwise considered. So yeah, this video I'm hopefully going to release soon, but I still have to finish editing the video of my camping trip that I went on recently, which unfortunately my phone was set to record in 720p, so the quality on that video suffered a bit, but I'm going to try not to make that mistake again. So yeah, I'll probably release that camping video first, and then I'll put out this little ramble vlog thing after that. Anyway, I'm gonna head back to my car and go pick up my sisters, so I'll see you next time.